Alright, it's Mike Redacted. From having the ability to walk from one side of the map to the other, to just exploring all of the points of interest. Gamers love the level of freedom and exploration which is given to them in open world games. Not all open world games are created equal though. With some exception, open world games by Ubisoft are boring and formulaic. But it's okay, if you pay them some money, you can skip all of that boring stuff, the side content, and you can even pay for items which are already in the game, which you can unlock by free just by completing side content. Essentially, you pay more money to Ubisoft to experience less of a game. This is what I consider to be somewhat of an admission that the open world games that Ubisoft creates are grindy and crap, and Ubisoft obviously knows it if they're putting this out. But the question today is, what actually makes an open world game good? Number 1. Adequate justification for the game being open world. The Halo series is a series of games in which you play as a badass character known as the Master Chief. I'm sure you all know of him. He's a walking war machine and his hobbies include shooting enemies in the face and somehow flipping 2-ton vehicles with his bare hands. Up until Halo Infinite appeared, the Halo series was mostly based on linear levels which were varied in location and interesting in design. The story of each game took place across multiple different planets, or at least multiple different locations on each planet. This is why I'm completely and utterly baffled at the choice to make Halo Infinite an open world game. Despite the game still being liked by players, including myself actually, many players like the mission sections of the game and the set pieces, nothing to do with the open world itself. Basically, players like Halo Infinite when it returns to its roots of being a level-based game. An open world game needs to have justification for being an open world game. Developers can't just make their game open world for the hell of it. That's a fucking stupid idea. The open world of Halo Infinite lacks variety. It's bland, not unlike a piece of dry toast. There's no snowy mountains, there's no tropical jungles, there's no city streets to fight through. It's pretty much just the same shit the whole map over. And it's a shame actually, because excluding the open world stuff, the game is actually really fun. But it's fun in spite of the open world, rather than because of it. When you consider games such as Oblivion and Skyrim, it makes sense for those games to be open world because a large part of the game is the exploration. Going out there and finding cool places with cool loot, fighting enemies to increase your skills and get better gear, or just to make some paper. The core gameplay loop of the Elder Scrolls games play into the exploration of the open world map. Without open worlds, the Elder Scrolls games would not work as well, and they would definitely not be as popular as they are now. Let's think about it another way for a second. If Halo Infinite was a single player linear mission style game, would the game be far worse than it is now? I don't think I've ever heard players make complaints of the Halo series that it was not open world. I do commend the developers for at least trying Halo as an open world game, but now that we know that it's not the winning formula, I hope that the next game returns to the roots of the series of being a mission based game. If 343 Industries really wants to keep some of the open world aspect in the future Halo games, then I imagine that more open levels with multiple paths to each objectives could be the compromise which works. The player is still offered some illusion of choice of path, but ultimately it's still linear enough that they can include all of those really cool set pieces and cinematic gaming moments which we have come to expect from the series. Number 2. Good side activities. As I previously mentioned in the opening statement of this video, Ubisoft makes games with large amounts of side content and activities. Most of this side content is repetitive crap which seems to be randomly peppered around the map. The side content in these games doesn't really add anything to the story. No one is going to chronicle that time that Ezio found all 100 of those white feathers, nor does it add anything to the setting of the game other than to emphasise that Ezio is sad about the untimely death of his little brother. But I believe the point about Ezio being sad about his little brother's death could have been done in a better and more concise way, where the player isn't forced to search the map for 100 or so white feathers. The side content in these games seem to purely exist in order to delay the player on completing the game. This is so that when someone asks Ubisoft how long does it take to complete your new Assassin's Creed game or something, they can say, oh, it takes 100 hours to do, instead of just the 35 hours which it takes to complete the main missions. Making a game an absolute collectathon does not add value to the player's experience. The other side content in Ubisoft games includes missions where you need to follow someone, and basically just simple fetch quests, both of which are not very fun to players, especially the following missions, which seems to solely exist to raise my blood pressure. Ghost of Tsushima, a game which is quickly becoming one of my favourites, is almost the antithesis of a Ubisoft game. When it comes to side content, all of the missions and content are exciting and well written. Even simple side quests are well paced and at least require a little bit of thought from you, such as the quests where you need to follow footprints or search an area for clues. Even the more gamey side content, such as the ones where you need to follow a fox to a shrine or slice bamboo with your katana, are at least quick, and you don't need to do all of these activities to reap the full rewards. The game is not a full-on collectathon, and when I played it, I found myself motivated to complete the majority of the side content, especially the haiku builders, as I liked to try and make the most gawping haiku possible. I thought that was really funny. In a good open world game, side content can't be there just to delay the player on completing the game. It has to be there to enhance the experience for the player by providing either fun activities which doesn't get repetitive, or it has to play into the setting of the game by either providing context to the world around the player or telling stories for side characters which may not be involved in the main story itself. I do want to caveat this point by talking about another game series that I love, which is the Just Cause series of games. The side content in the Just Cause games is actually repetitive. You go into a location, you blow shit up, and that's pretty much it. In Just Cause 3, there's like 200 different locations which you need to do the blowing up of the shit to 100% complete the game, but unlike the mind-numbing side content in Ubisoft games, this repetitive side content is fucking cool, and you get to choose how you blow up all of the shit yourself. You can bomb locations with jets, you can get down there with a rocket launcher, or you can even get more creative with your grappling hook and some explosive materials. Even though it's really repetitive and doesn't really add anything to the world building of the game, this sandbox style feature set is really fun. This is because the fun in the Just Cause series of games comes from the sandbox nature of them, and the fact that epic moments happen organically when the player is playing the game. You see a helicopter, you fire your grappling hook, you hook it to the ground, and the helicopter comes down and smashes on the ground in a huge explosion, you know. You're flying about in your wingsuit, doing whatever the hell you want. It's a great and really fun game. Ubisoft's side content is not like that. And I would just like to say that I'm not picking on Ubisoft games because I have a chip on my shoulder about Ubisoft games in particular. They're just really good examples of bad game design for open worlds. Good world building. Good world building is the glue which holds the player in the world. I guess you could rename this point immersion, but it's just a bit more than that, a bit more than immersing the player in the game. Immersion is when the player feels like they are part of the world and they forget that they're playing a game. World building, to me at least, is when this immersion is taken further and the player feels like they are part of the world and that that world lives and breathes just like a real place would. Maybe I'm thinking too much about it, and they maybe are the same thing, but moving swiftly on. What is the point of playing a game and doing all of the side quests when the world is dead and lifeless, where the NPCs have absolutely no personality and are boring to interact with? Maybe it feels like your choices and actions don't matter in this game world. Obviously, there's no point in that. A good open world game needs to have the player invested in the world. A game with good world building would have NPCs acting realistically, going about their daily lives. It should appear, at least at a glance, that the NPCs are real people with real lives. If the NPCs are walking around aimlessly or just standing in the one spot waiting for the player to come back and talk to them, then the facade of the world quickly falls away and the player will realise that they are interacting with soulless ones and zeros than realistic characters with an illusion that they have lives, hopes and dreams. A game which I think pulls off the world building with NPCs really well is The Witcher 3. If you take a run through the free city of Novigrad, you'll see NPCs going about their business in the market. Patrolling guards, women doing the oldest profession. I'm not going to say the name of it here, but I think you can imagine. All of this adds to the facade of Novigrad City being a real place. These people, when you run past, look like real people would if you were running past them in the real world. Obviously, if you sit and watch these NPCs for any length of time, the facade will fall down, but all that's needed in Novigrad City as you traverse through is just the 5 or 6 seconds that you see them illusion of these people being real. I know that if you watch them they would look unreal and the facade would fall, but it doesn't need to be that deep. One of my favourite quotes of all time, which was said by another YouTuber and maybe he got it from somewhere else, is that games developers are illusionists, and I think that the illusion that Witcher 3 throws up in Novigrad City is a very good one. Obviously NPCs are just the tip of the spear, and the player will probably be interacting with NPCs the most, so the world building aspect of getting them to look and act realistically is really important. But on top of the NPCs, other things need to act realistically too. This can be as simple as grass and trees blowing in the wind when the player hears the wind sound effect, and goes all the way up to the wildlife and the colour palettes of the sunset being realistic. The world should not appear to revolve around the player. The player should be given the impression that this world exists without them being there. The game world needs to appear as it does outside your window. Technical aspects. A spin-off point to the world building and immersion point would be the technical aspects of the game. This would be twofold: the amount of jank which is in the game and also the completeness of the features. If a game is janky or buggy or performs poorly, then it brings the player right out of the game. It doesn't matter how real you made the NPCs act, or if you gave them 8K skin textures with bump maps and normal maps and all sorts. If the game doesn't control how the player expects, or glaring bugs happen right in front of the player's eyes, then the player is ripped like a baby out of the womb, right out of the comfort of being part of the world, and they realise they're just some guy at a keyboard with crippling student debt. And I understand from personal experience that this can be uncomfortable. Completeness of the features is a simple thing. If the player feels like something is missing, such as there is a building that looks huge on the outside, and then when they enter they realise it's just one prick in a small room, then they are again removed from their immersion of the room. Instead of being present in the game, I'm thinking, why the hell did the developers make the building so big if it's just one room? Where's the rest of it? It's obviously not just this. It can be missing features in combat, traversal, or really anything. If the player notices that there's something that they want to do or want to see but they can't, then the world building and immersion crumbles. Good utilisation of the open world. Personally, I could create a game with an open world of 100 square kilometres. Just do a bit of terrain generation in Unity and randomly put bushes and trees down. It's really not as hard as you'd think to do this. But that game world would be boring and it would probably also run like shit. Open worlds need to be properly utilising their map to keep the game world interesting and keep the player engaged. I think Todd Howard's formula for Fallout and the Elder Scrolls games was that there was a point of interest shown to the player at least once every 40 to 60 seconds. Not every single part of the map needs to have a point of interest on it, as that would become overwhelming, but large swaths of open, empty map are boring. The player needs to be adequately entertained as they move through the map. I think the 40 to 60 seconds between being shown the points of interest is a good formula, as it gives the player some time between places, and then it's not too long before they stumble upon the next cool thing. Don't get me wrong, L.A. Noire is a really good game and I thoroughly enjoyed playing it all of those years ago. Apart from the ending, I didn't like the ending very much, but when it came out I distinctly remember driving through the open world looking for something cool and just being struck that apart from the quests, there's almost fuck all to do. You could search for collectibles or do one of the one-dimensional street crime quests, but those tasks weren't really that appealing. Despite being set in a city, sometimes it felt like the open world of that game was a desolate wasteland. L.A. Noire would really have benefited from more side missions which were a bit more in depth, maybe some interesting side characters that you could meet and do tasks with, and possibly even some shops where you could change your weapons or clothing. The points of interest which do litter the map of any good open world game would have to be varied, interesting, and many of them would have to be completely unique. Obviously, it's not enough to just litter the open world of a game with the same dungeon 300 times. You can see this in Starfield and see how well it's working out for them. The dungeons in Skyrim may only be a few different styles. You have caves, castles, Dwemer ruins and ice caves and some other stuff, but every single one of them is laid out uniquely. Perhaps excluding the castles, which can be quite similar in design to one another, but this means when the player enters a new location for the first time, they'll be sure that they're going to see something that they've never seen before. I think especially in the Dwemer ruins, Bethesda really utilised that setting very well, and the Dwemer ruins are amongst the best dungeons that Bethesda has ever done. They're so interesting, so flexible, and you never know whether you're going to be running through tight corridors or if there's going to be a wide open space to fight through. On top of all the interesting locations being paced and shown to the player, there should also be an interesting smorgasbord of biomes and different terrain shown to the player as well in the open world game. It shouldn't just be all, as Halo Infinite is, the same thing the whole map over. There needs to be some variety to make it a bit interesting to the player, so when they arrive at a new location or a new part of the map that they've never been to before, they're not just seeing the same trees and all the same shrubbery with the same hills again. I think Ghost of Tsushima does this really well, because at the start of the game you've got a really nice idyllic area with rolling hills and some high mountains, but really it's just all rolling hills and lovely grass fields and beautiful forests as well. And then when you go to the second part, it's kind of swampy, it's a bit darker, there's colour tones are a bit muted, there's not as many golden forests and red forests. And then finally when you get to the final part of the island chain, it's snowy and all the trees are either evergreen trees or they're dead, you know, not dead, but all the leaves are off for winter. And it gives a good progression through the areas and it makes the areas feel distinct. Mobility. Just existing and moving through the open world without taking into account the dungeons and stuff should be an enjoyable experience. But even I, the man who thinks that the no fast travel survival mode run is the best way to play Skyrim, watch the video, realise that I may be the outlier with that opinion, and that the player of any good open world game should be enabled to move around the world quickly if they so choose. This is because if there is a quest on the other side of the map or something that they want to see or do on the other side of the map, the player may not have the patience to walk or run there. Obviously, depending on how big the game world is, just walking to the other end of the world could range from a minor inconvenience all the way up to a major bore, which makes the player not want to play the game anymore at that point, and then they quit. And game developers should realise that every time someone quits in anger or frustration, there's a chance that that player will never come back to that game. How many half-finished games do you have in your Steam library? Large open world games need to give the player mobility options to traverse through the world quickly. The most basic version of this would be a fast travel system. This allows the player to pretty much teleport from point A to point B with some in-game time passing and a load screen. The developers could also give the option to use some sort of vehicle or horse to get through the map for players who want to move quickly through the map but don't necessarily or can't use the fast travel system at that point in time. Without mobility options like this, often players are turned off, and even the most enthusiastic of players can become bored with an open world game. Now we will have sort of a quick fire round of things which I think open world games need to have. These are things which I don't really need to talk at length about, so they don't really qualify for their own section in the video. And the first of this quick fire round would be game interactables. There's no reason in Fallout 3 that you should be able to push this trolley or sit on this bench. But small interactions like this are important for open world games as they make the games feel and seem more real and make the player feel like they can interact with things as they can in real life. Number 2, a shop system. Obviously this doesn't apply to every open world game, but it is a good ingredient to add if you can, or if the developer can. If a shop doesn't fit the theme of the game, or the developers want to make the game feel isolated and make the player feel completely self-reliant, then they can miss the shop out in the game. A shop system where the players can buy and sell items that they can look can help justify and give purpose to the player. All that cool treasure that the player's been collecting can feel pointless unless there is something that they can get back for it. Being able to barter can motivate the player to go out and try and find more dungeons to raid in order to find more loot. On this quest for loot, the player can often encounter quests or cool places to experience in the game. Number 3 would be a good soundtrack. Nothing makes going through an amazing open world game better and more atmospheric than a good soundtrack. I think that this is one place where Skyrim and Oblivion absolutely excels. For me, nothing brings joy to my heart quite like walking around Cyrodiil with Jeremy Soul's amazing soundtrack playing in the background and watching the sunset over the beautiful landscape. That just feels absolutely amazing, and it brings back memories from my childhood. Number 4 would be good and detailed lore. Good and detailed lore is one thing that I may have already covered, and it may already fall under the world building part, but I didn't really talk about it there, so I'll quickly add it into this part, into the quickfire section of the video. One thing that keeps me interested in an open world game is really cool and detailed backstories for location and peoples. This can really allow depth to be added to quests where it wasn't before, and the impact can actually seem bigger than once thought when you know the lore in the background. It's also cool to talk to NPCs and read through various notes and books which details the open world game's rich lore and history, although I know reading video game books is not for everyone. Thanks for listening everyone. If you made it to this part of the video, I would like you to please comment, like and subscribe. That would be excellent. Let me know in the comments section if you think I missed something or if I got something wrong. That would be great, thank you very much. I really just wanted to make this video because I've been thinking a lot about open world games lately. I've done a few videos on open world games and it's really been getting the cogs turning, dusting the cobwebs out of my head and thinking what actually makes an open world game good. And I kind of put pen to paper, or not pen to paper, but I wrote words in a Word document to try and figure out and pinpoint exactly what I thought made an open world game good. Thanks for watching everyone, see you next time.